Hi, this is Daniela Cambone, and welcome back to the Daniela Cambone Show. Very excited today to be speaking with the author of a book and documentary that has been making waves in the media. Today, we have David Rogers Webb. He is the man behind The Great Taking. It's the book that examines the global economic system of how it's being manipulated by hidden individuals and institutions, leading to a concentration of wealth and power, intentional induced financial crises, and the dematerialization of securities. Basically, if I had to sum it up, it's about the elite wanting to take everything and anything that we have left. So please welcome to the show, David Webb. David, I read the book with great enthusiasm, watched the documentary. Thank you for joining me here today. I have a ton of questions.
Daniela, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, I want to say I hope the audience will be thankful for sure, because I can't tell you, people were finding me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, sending in hundreds of emails a day like, you gotta have David Webb on. And that's why I say this book has really taken people by storm. I mean, are you surprised by the success of the documentary and the book? I mean, were you expecting this?
Well, I I I have to say, of course, because it's been a lot, and it's my experience of this is that I am essentially a participant in this. Like, I'm not making it happen. I am just cooperating with this. And even the experience of writing the book was like that. It's much bigger. It's a big thing.
Right. And how long did it take you to write the book?
Well, I mean, I've had my experience with it is goes back over 20 years, and I
Right.
collected the materials over a long period of time, and I've experimented for many years in trying to get through to people with this and explain it. I've tried to head these things off in Europe, in Sweden, in Europe, to get through to people. And uh, I would say I eventually had something like I mean, this sounds kind of creepy, but I had something like a death experience where
Wow.
I really came back to write that book because I knew that I had to do it. I had to write it. It wasn't going to come out otherwise. And
Well,
so,
can I ask, like, were you ill, or
well,
when
I'd
you say
rather
you had?
not go into it, but it is like that. It is like that. I think it was it was something where I had to have something to come back to do. What was
Wow.
my purpose? And it was to write this. I knew I had to do that. I had to write it, and it really involved a lot of I did things like fasting and meditation and going in the sea through the ice in the wintertime. I did things like completely going off of caffeine so that I could come back and really use it like a tool when I had to. And I also smoked a lot of cigars. I found that while
So
in the tough spots of writing, it does give you focus.
so
Um,
let's Sorry.
anyway, it was, to put it, it was a very intense thing where I would wake up during the night, write things down. I'd wake up in the morning. I had stuff on scraps of paper, and eventually I herded it all together. I wrote it on an old computer that I never connected to the internet because my main concern was not for my safety, but that I would not be able to complete it and get it out. So I did not want to connect it. Only two people knew I was even writing it. So it was like that. And I finally was done, I connected it at the end of May and I sent it out to a few hundred people. And then it kind of went from there.
Okay, so take me back, okay, because this is your first book, correct?
Yeah.
Right. So for the folks at home new to you, maybe they haven't read it. Let's go back to the beginning because um, you right now you're not active in the markets, but back in the day you were managing public equity and hedge funds.
Yes.
And I know you noticed fund flows were very large relative to the size of the US economy. But take me back to your background because I know everyone's saying, well, he's a Wall Street insider. Like I said, he managed hedge funds. But where were you working? Where was it? New York City? Tell me where you were when you were working in the financial markets.
Yeah, I went to New York as a young guy. I tell the story. I didn't really know how to enter into it because my family background was they were medical people and engineers. There was no one in
Right.
finance, and I went into it.
Your dad wanted you to be a doctor, you say,
Yeah,
yeah?
well, I think my grandmother wanted me to be a doctor. My father was an engineer, so I knew that something was going wrong in our world in a big way, and that is really why I was drawn into it. And I decided to go into business. As I mentioned, I got a subscription to the Wall Street Journal, and I would just page through it to try to understand what this was. And I noticed the tombstones relating to deals, mergers and acquisitions deals. I noticed the size of these transactions. I noticed the names of the firms and where they were. And I realized from that, well, I need to go to New York. So I I managed to do that. And for me, coming from Ohio is like going to another planet, or another country, going into New York City. And I've always known there is something happens if you go directly into the center of the unknown and things that you're afraid of.
Yeah.
You just go right into the.
Where where were you working in New York? So were you offered a job in
Yeah,
on Wall
well, I
Street?
started in Ohio with a computer services firm, something called CompuServe, which was
Yeah, of
people
course.
may not know of it today, but it was kind of a forerunner of a lot of the things that we have
Absolutely.
internet now. So it was pre-internet, but they had a computer network and they had something that functioned kind of like email, and it was possible to do searches and screens on databases and things like that. So I made the decision to be a technical rep, not a sales guy, a technical rep, because I knew that would be harder to be the technical rep. So I was doing the programming of the applications, but I went out with the sales guys every day. So they kept me out all day. Now, the advantage of that was I basically went into every financial firm in New York City in my first year. And the
So
value of that is, so I say things are intimidating, whether they're people or situations, until you've met them. And when you've met them, the spell is kind of broken. So,
absolutely true.
yeah, so I had that the first year when I was 22, 23 years old. And then the other thing is I don't miss opportunities.
So this is in your 20s, so you have this, great job. You're living in New York City.
I wouldn't
You're in the
say it's
belly of the
I
beast.
wouldn't say it's a great job.
Well,
It was
on paper, right? It sounds good.
thing
So when, I
floor.
mean, you're a young guy, so when do you start? when you start realizing, hey, because I know in the documentary you say you found the Fed was managing the financial system. And, today, I love how you said, like, today, that doesn't sound like a conspiracy theory, but, it's kind of like we say, well, yeah, of course they're managing the financial system. But back in the day, it was considered a conspiracy.
Yes.
So when did you start thinking, yeah, something's not adding up here?
Well, that was in the really in a big way in the late 90s. I would so I had gone for mergers and acquisitions. I had been in that for 5 years, and again, it was kind of like living hell. It's sleeping on the floor of the office, days without sleep, not very nice people to be
Yeah,
around, and pretty
yeah,
pretty tough stuff. So you toughen up, and I called it the crucible. You're under a lot of pressure, and things happen, reactions. So you learn about yourself and other people. It packs a lot in. And then I moved to a private equity firm, which was the biggest in the world at that time, and that was also very intensive. And then I moved back to Cleveland, really to essentially save my family, to leave all the stress in New York. But then it all started again there. I was into managing long only equity, and then managing one hedge fund, which became three hedge funds in the late 90s. So it was in the aftermath of the Asian financial crisis that the markets started, because I handled all the trading. And I guess I have a strong rational mind, but I have a strong intuitive mind. I use both aspects. And I could see that things were moving in ways that just did not make sense in the aftermath of the Asian financial crisis. This is the beginning of the markets going straight up on unabashedly bad news. Something that's just bad. Why would it go straight up on that? And so I started thinking that there's some exogenous force coming into the market at times. And that's when I noticed the scale. I've always looked, no, I recognize when a number's a big number. It's a simple thing. So I saw that the scale of the treasury purchases by the Bank of Japan were big numbers. And I thought, let me scale that. How big is that relative to GDP? How big is it relative to the story was that they were recycling trade surpluses into these treasury purchases. So I decided to look at that, and I found that even at that point, late 90s, these treasury purchases by the Bank of Japan were about 10 times whatever trade surplus could be. So we were already going into this realm where the financialization was 10 times whatever real thing was happening. And then I began looking at, well, what is the US, what's happening in US treasuries and the US money supply, and what is the Fed doing? So I started looking at the M3 figures, which then were published weekly. And what this was reflecting was the open market operations of the New York Fed, which is really the Fed. That is the business end of the Fed. And so I started scaling that and realizing that in individual weeks, the amount of new money was over 1% of GDP. So, you're talking about a very high annualized rate of growth in money relative to the growth in the GDP. So two things came out of that. I realized that there was the transmission of money creation into the real economy was breaking down. And so it was going into a financial bubble. And I knew that was happening in real time. So the Fed certainly knew they were doing that in real time. But it was something that no one else understood. I could even talk with people, try
Well, I
to
was going to ask. I mean,
well they
you did you not? I mean, were you not talking about this with your counterparts?
yeah,
Were
they
you the only ones?
no, they did not want to know. I am not kidding. It was conspiracy theory. And then I found that I could see so I started studying the rate of growth in the money and tracking when it was accelerating and decelerating. And it's always growing, but I found that when they pushed on the accelerator, when it was accelerating, I had maybe 2 or 3 days to get positioned before a sharp move up in the markets. And and other people had no idea that was coming. And then when it was ripping, I could see when it was decelerating, and then I would shift my stance for that. So I was basically surfing back and forth with the up and down moves in the market with absolutely perfect timing on every move.
So were you investing at the time? I mean, were you able to capitalize on that? And
This is the period I had 300 to 400 positions on at the same time. I mean, I've
so
done a lot of I've done so much trading. I'm in trading anonymous. I don't need to.
so you did very well during that time
Yeah, yeah. Well, through that
because you were able to see.
from from the from let's say the end of the period when there was the ruble crisis and the long-term capital management crisis from in that period through the dot-com bubble and bust. um, the funds gross were up about 320% during a period when all the indices were negative through that period. So it was astounding. But people, let's say I did not need to raise money. There, there,
So
there were months when I had $100 million coming in a month. It was more than I really wanted to deal with.
um so fast for so here you are, you know something's up, you're doing extremely well. What comes next?
You mean after that? Um,
Yes.
I um, I ended up winding all that up, and let me. I decided to take all the funds to cash and return cash to investors, which I did, and I left the firm.
You left the firm. Now, have you left the financial world at this point?
Actually, I started another firm, and that was at the beginning of 2003.
I want to fast forward a bit to when did you have this? I mean, did you have is more the question. Did you have this aha moment of, wait a second, I've really connected the dots and I think I'm onto something here?
Did I have a moment like that?
Like what, yeah, did you have that moment and when was it that you felt I need to get this story out?
Okay, are you talking about the situation we're in now? Or what?
Well, leading up to like because you started seeing nefarious behavior in the markets back then, right? But then were
Yeah.
you just brushing it aside or were you still investigating?
Oh,
I mean, I want to get to the path.
I was dealing with it, and I felt I had a responsibility to protect people through that. protect my clients, and I've always taken my responsibility very seriously. So I did that through the dot-com bubble and bust, and and I eventually in the mid 2000s. I mean, I wound up my second firm in at the end of 2004, and I knew what was happening with the asset-backed securities, the artificiality of that this was all going to collapse. It was the next bubble in asset-backed securities and derivatives. And I knew that the prime brokers would all fail in the next bust. So you can't run a hedge fund without having all your positions with the prime broker. So it's kind of a fool's errand if you're in the last go around, because you could be correctly positioned, and you have to hedge against the market, but you can only do that through entities that will become insolvent and fail. And we knew that that in fact did happen. All the prime brokers were massively insolvent. So I was it was one of the happiest periods of my life because I was not in the market at all. And
Like I said, the book is centered, around your main thesis of the elite are basically there to take all we have, hence the name The Great Taking. So I guess my question was, when did you get to that thesis, that realization of everything was happening for you was tied to, well, this is just part of a system built around the
well,
elite
I
reaping reaping it all, taking it all.
say I for a long time I understood the 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 privileged position of the people behind the central banks and their ability to control everything through uh, creating money out of nothing. And but I didn't really worry about that. I could accept that as long as it wasn't outright evil. And that is what is now. I guess it's always been there to see. I think when we go back through history, we can see that the central banking power is joined at the hip with warfare, and it always has been. If you go back through the Bank of England and the history of the Federal Reserve, the bankers have funded all sides in every war. And I would say that I have really just come to terms with that through really through the COVID period, through the post 2020 period, through that awful period of years, to realize we're in a global hybrid war. And what I'm showing in the book is why that is happening now, and that we have to face up to this. This is the very hard stuff to
It
deal with.
is the Fed. So the Fed is evil for you. Is that a correct statement?
Um, yes, in a word.
But is it Jerome Powell, or do you think he's just a pawn in the
They're
game?
they're fa they're face people. They're face people, but I'm not. This is. Well, let's talk about that. Um, the way I describe it is primates live in groups of 30 to 80 individuals, and above that they split off into another troop. And humans lived in tribal groups, villages. Now, in that kind of a situation, you have a kind of symbiosis of the different individuals there. And every group of people, there are people born even into the same family with different characteristics, abilities, disabilities. There's a spread of that. And so within these groups, for example, someone was always awake during the night. So someone was always watching. And in terms of these abilities and disabilities, they're about, the estimates vary, but it's a fairly high percentage. 3%, some people say 6%, as high as that, are psychopaths. And a psychopath, it's an overused term, but these people don't have empathy, and they might actually enjoy hurting things. And if you're in a tribal situation, I'm old enough. I grew up when kids actually played outside together,
Hmm.
and you knew who your playmates were. You knew them from an early age, what sort of people they are. So within a small, a tribal group or a village, you know who these people are, and you don't have to kill them, but you know who they are. So you might invite them out on the hunting party. You know, they would be good at that. But as I say, you wouldn't let them babysit the kids. So there, in the distribution of humanity, there are people like this. Now, what the problem we have for humanity is on this inhuman scale. Um, People like this are not identified, they're not controlled or checked in any way, and they get into control positions. Now, if you had a system where you had finite money, if you were on a hard metals system, which the founding fathers were insistent it had to be, but this was subverted, and the Fed was created on the model of the Bank of England. They basically followed us. They followed us from Europe and came over and did this. And so, but if you had a finite money system and you had some economic entity that was being run by bad people, it would burn itself out. It just it wouldn't take everything down. What we have here is a situation clearly where this people like this have literally unlimited funding, open-ended, unlimited funding. And this is the war machine that is linked to the central banking power. And if you go back, G. Edward Griffin does a wonderful
Right.
job explaining this, that they use wars to massively escalate debt levels. And this
Well,
is,
like let's apply that today. And by the way, has J. Edward Griffin reached out to you? He's the author of Jack of
well,
All
I
Trades.
reached out to him. I
Okay.
would say,
So I was just curious,
yeah,
not to digress.
I've been in touch with him
Um,
recently.
okay, so let's apply these theories to today. So, no shortage of wars here. What we see in the Middle East, obviously, Ukraine, Russia. Build the thesis for me here with what's currently happening. How do the central banks benefit from these wars?
Okay, well, first of all, you go into and Ed Griffin really explains this, that both the Bank of England and the Fed started by buying treasuries, government debt. But the
Hmm.
money they use to buy that debt, they create out of absolutely nothing, thin air. So now they own these treasuries that the public is paying them interest on, when that debt could have been issued directly by the Treasury without them being part of it. So that is the first step, is they insert themselves into that process. Now they're collecting all the paying interest from the public, essentially, on something they created out of nothing. Then they use that as their capital base to create debt, loans on top of that in a 10-to-1 ratio, which is what it used to be in the US. In March of 2020, they dropped the reserve requirement to zero. So it is now literally unlimited the amount of um, debt they're creating. Um, so there's no capital ratio. So it's a sleight of hand that allows them to collect massive payments. And then, but they need to keep that debt bubble growing, which they do successfully, year after year, decade after decade. It can't be allowed to contract, and every war has been used to massively grow uh, the government debt, which of course grows their power even more. Now, what I go into in the book, and this is the explanation for why this is happening now. This power of creating money. If you have a finite money system, in order to come up with money, you have to sell something, a product or a service, which puts a downward pressure on price level. It's stable. Now, if you introduce a way to create money out of nothing, initially, it's an awesome power because projects get done, all kinds of things get done that wouldn't happen otherwise. Some of that was good stuff. It's actually going into the real economy. Projects are done. But then it reaches a point from chronic overuse that the translation into real economic activity is breaking down. Now, at the end of these super cycles, the money is increasingly going into financialization, financial bubble, and into warfare. That's what happens. And if you look back, when this was breaking down at the end of the 90s, shortly after that, we had the global war on terror. September 11th, global war on terror. It's been, I think we have to be honest with ourselves. The world changed massively at that point. And it is an end stage phenomena where it goes from being somewhat benevolent to being increasingly malevolent. And then the collapse point, the people think, well, they will just keep inflating this. Well, that's happened already. That's already been done. It's, I had someone recently say, well, why won't they just inflate this further? And my answer was, well, look at the last financial crisis. For example, the US commercial paper market seized commercial paper, the short-term, like 30-day loans that the biggest companies use, these commercial paper facilities. And the Fed created $1.5 million or $1.5 trillion, almost literally overnight, put that into an LLC and use that to liquefy the commercial paper market. They created Maiden Lane 1, 2, and 3 to buy derivatives off, take those from the banks. So they've already done, there has been a massive scale of money creation. And those are the parts that were revealed that they were doing. They can also do this in dark entities. You don't even know what they're doing in terms of the money they're creating and where they're intervening.
I want to jump to the part, and I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but I can't wait for this part.
You know,
Is surrounding the great taking, because I know the people at home are probably, it's terrifying. I mean, your thesis, it's terrifying, right? And we just picture like these grim reapers coming and trying to take everything we have. But I mean, how does it unfold? How does it affect us? How will it affect us on our day to day? And
yeah,
does it happen all of a sudden? Like, will there be another, crisis?
yeah.
Or does it happen drip, drip, drip slowly?
Uh, well, as they say, There's a joke.
I guess the question is, I think people want to know is like, do I just wake up one day and all the money in my bank account is gone? What does it look like?
Yeah, supposedly someone was asked, "How did you go bankrupt?" And he said, "Well, slowly at first, and then all at once." And it's like that. There will be an unfolding. We are in it. We are in it now. We are in this global hybrid war. We are in this collapse process. But let me explain. Just give the thumbnail of what's been done here. Securities, stocks and bonds were property for 4 centuries. And then this very sophisticated subterfuge was begun in the late 1960s to uh, to assure that they can be taken in this go around. So in the Great Depression, it was just the good old fashioned way of doing it, that if you were in debt, then this has happened for centuries, when there's a bust, anybody who's in debt loses what they had to the creditors. But what's different here is that even investments, including everything that's in pension funds, insurance funds, all of that, and things you own personally, you have beneficial ownership. Those, even if you have no borrowings against them, they will be taken because they're pooled now. And this is the structure. So the first step was to dematerialize. That alone did not do it, because you can't have electronic records of ownership with specifically identified securities, and that's what Sweden's system had been up until recently. Then in 1994, they changed the Uniform Commercial Code in the U.S., which they were able to do quietly in all 50 states. And the change was to make your ownership into a security entitlement, which was a new legal concept. It had never existed before. And what that does is it turns your claim into a contractual claim, which assures that you are an unsecured creditor to your own property. Then all of the securities are held in these vast pools. It is all pooled by law. It's all held in pools. And these pools are used without restriction as the collateral underpinning the derivatives complex. And now we know about all of this because Europe was being pressured to conform to this model, which was, the Fed was involved with, the Depository Trust Corp, and this forcing Europe into this was led by the U.S. Department of State. So this has been done from the highest levels of the U.S. government, not by some other foreign power. So it is the banking power that is doing this. Think J.P. Morgan. It is the
Right.
banking power behind this. So
So
they control the government and governments. In Europe, they formed something called the Legal Certainty Group to investigate how to subvert the law in Europe.
is this why we saw so many bank failures and more bank failures to come?
That is similar to what happened in the 30s, is that there's a kind of series of bank failures that are allowed to happen. And in the 30s, the first bank failure was in 1930, and then the entire banking system was closed overnight in March of 1933. So it unfolded for 3 years.
I want to ask you, is that what because the folks at home, I want to give them tools and power, and what can we do to prepare? So, do you have cash in the bank, or are you completely out of the banking
No,
system?
no, well, it's hard to live without having cash in the bank.
Right.
So I actually have a lot of cash in banks in, different places, different countries, but My wife knows, and I have money in treasury funds, U.S. treasury funds. My wife knows that we can wake up one day and all of that is gone. So my point with the book is that this must be stopped. It must not be allowed to happen. It does not have to happen. But if it does go off, we will lose that. And then you're in a worsening hybrid war situation. And then you really look to your physical reality and how you will live. So I never wanted to be a farmer, but I am a
Yeah, I love how you say that. Like it's
farmer now.
you say you'd much rather live in the city, go down to Whole Foods. I mean, it's a lot more work to be a farmer, but here you are, a farmer.
Yeah, well, what I have found is every year I could not ignore it, that I just had to do this. So very simply, if you can eliminate debt, if you can get entirely out of debt, you should do that. But I worry about even saying that because there are many people in circumstances where they can't get out of debt, or they would destroy the happiness of their family. So I say to people, don't destroy your marriage, don't destroy your kids, based on your financial fears. We
Well,
so it's
I'm thinking if they come and take everything, does debt even matter at that point? Why get out of debt at that point if it's the end of the world and we're all.
and that's why it's a very personal decision about there's no one size fits all about what to do about this. Um, it is what we really need to do. I've found since I've written this, there have been people that have contacted me globally, and they're very wealthy people, and some of them are personally very wealthy, some of them, billionaires, people who manage a lot of money, and they are all when they understand this, and they do, and I'll tell you, it's irrefutable. No one can deny that this is the case. But the first reaction is, how can I hide from this? And my message is, you can't. That's the hard thing to.
How far out are we from this reality? Are we, is it a 10 years out, 20 years out,
No, I think it's quite soon. We are
less than
we are
5 years?
Oh, I think we are
Okay.
we are in an escalating hybrid war right now. And
Does that lead to a great, what everyone's talking about? Is it a great reset for you? Is there a reset?
well, there has to be a reset of some kind. We just don't want the reset that they have planned for us. Uh, so this is the most profound time in perhaps in human history, what we're facing right now, because it's the thing I say to people is, this will this is threatening everyone globally and all the way to the top of the system at the same time. Now, that sounds terrible, and it is, but that is actually a good thing, because divide and rule will not work. If everybody is in this and everybody wakes up and we get out of this
Right.
unconsciousness. We have a problem of global unconsciousness, where people do not want to face up to things. And Ed Griffin, if people read all the way through the book to the end of the book, he knew all this some time ago, that it will come to a point that you can't be an armchair warrior. It's going to take 1 million people that are activated and making
Mm.
personal sacrifice to change things.
When you say this, of course, central bank digital currencies come to mind, and I want to get to that because often when I interview experts, people will say, we can stop central bank digital currencies. And like I said, I want to get to that. But before getting back to how you're protecting yourself. So are you, can we say, are you in the United States?
No, I'm in Sweden.
You're in Sweden. You have farmland.
Yeah.
Um, what role, if any, does gold play for you in this monetary system?
Well, I would say that people should I would say yes to a lot of things. People should diversify in ways maybe they've never thought of, and don't put everything in any one thing. So, people will talk about Bitcoin, but there are potential problems with Bitcoin. Could it be a reasonable diversification? Yes. But could there be problems? Yes. Um, Everything could be a problem because they can eventually get to it. So gold, for example, makes a lot of sense, but it can also be confiscated eventually. Now, it's not. I don't believe. I don't believe that is the plan at this point, because gold is not the collateral backing in the system. It's all.
And Lynette Zhang would say, and if it's the pre 1933 stuff, they can't take that. That's why she loves that gold, the numismatic gold.
Oh, well, I mean, I guess I would say there's no limit to what they can do if they just continue running unhindered. So there are things you can do so that you're not the first to fall, so to speak. Where they will go, okay, this is the key insight from Ed Griffin. If I would direct people to. Um, he goes into he I have not read them, but he's read the memoirs, the different writings of the people that were present at that meeting at Jekyll Island in 1910. And I think the key thing is their main concern was that the economy was running away without them. The major growth was in banks outside of the Federal Reserve System, and they were doing just fine. So the banks mainly in the West and the South, and also businesses. This was the golden age. Businesses were largely self-financing, so they did not need the credit being created by the New York money center banks, which were essentially European interests. And so they were trying to figure out how to get control of it. And this is what people have to face up to. They could only get control of it by literally destroying the economy. That's what they did. They destroyed the US economy and the global economy that was engineered in order to close all those banks, only reopen with what they controlled, and to have the business conditions such that they control the credit creation from that point forward. Now, the next step is they had created in the Federal Reserve Act the rationale that they had to have gold backing. And so in the crisis, they said, well, obviously we have to have all the gold because we're in a crisis. So they confiscated the gold of the public. Then they did not use that to expand credit. Why did they take all the gold? So there could not be a parallel system that would develop without them, that would run without them. That is what people have to understand about this. They will crush everything in order to restart where they control everything. So they do not want.
Crush the US dollar, David?
Well, I don't know. I don't know. I'm agnostic about what will happen to the different currencies at this point. I'm just saying strategically, I understand the strategy. That
Um,
strategically,
yeah,
what they want to do is restart so that they do not want there to be a parallel system.
I want to get back to the I know it's a loaded question, right? But when we say they or the elites want to take, I mean, there's a lot of millionaires, billionaires who watch the show. I know it's not them. So when we say the they, I
Yeah.
mean, is it higher than a Klaus Schwab? I mean,
Oh, yes.
what
Well,
is this entity we speak of
the
that is just
the way I
evil and
put it,
plotting this and wants to destroy our lives?
even George Soros, that everybody has as their
Yes.
their child, someone controlling everything. When I knew him, Soros Management had $7 billion, which sounds like a lot. That sounded like a big number. $7 billion is nothing in the scheme of things.
Yeah.
Even George Soros is just, down there in the food chain. Someone like Klaus Schwab is just a useful tool to them. Bill Gates, you can see the man isn't even intelligent. These people are not actually, anyone that you see is not actually behind this. It's a very small group of people. The people, for example, the guys, the real intelligence behind it is very tiny in terms of the number of people. For example, the changes to the Uniform Commercial Code, that was done by two guys, were the architects of that. So by and large, other people don't understand it. They are following, they are chasing money. And this is a principle of Sun Tzu, is you cause your enemy to position in, to move into a disadvantaged position by chasing profits. It's easily done. So that's what's been done. Think about our society. People think that they shouldn't do anything unless they're being paid. And whatever they're being paid more to do, that's what they should do. This is how people direct themselves. It's that is no way to decide what to do. So but it's endemic in our society globally. So people are easily, but what happens is when this money system breaks down, they then go to physical control over people, and they can only sustain that for a period of time. Um,
By physical control, what do you mean by that?
well, we can see through the COVID period that
Right,
it's breathtaking in terms of the global execution of
right,
that. And
right. So wear a mask or whatever.
well, lockdowns, but also
Right.
the principal control is through fear, through anxiety,
Yeah.
because when people are fearful and anxious, even if they have a high native intelligence, it collapses their intelligence level.
I know. All logic goes out the window.
Yeah.
I mean, I share this story with my family, but I was pregnant during the pandemic, David, with my twin boys. Um,
Well, congratulations on your.
yeah. So, but the things that we were doing, so I remember when we were leaving the hospital, of course I couldn't receive flowers and you couldn't bring your own bathrobe, whatever, because COVID might have been attached to it. But like ridiculous things like I couldn't have a car seat in the hospital to put the kids in, the newborns in, because COVID may have been attached to the car seat. And at the time, people are telling you this, and you're thinking, and the doctors, and you're like, okay, okay. And today only do you reflect back and think, like,
Yeah.
I cannot believe the things we listened and thought made sense at the time.
Yes. Yeah, we're all vulnerable to that.
So, but I want to get back to the point of central bank digital currencies and how that ties in to
Yeah.
your theory. I mean, I mentioned this on the show. I'm still kind of in shock when people still ask me, like, do you really think it's happening? I mean, the IMF openly talks about it. Like I said, Christine Lagarde over at the ECB put out a New Year's message like, yay, 25th anniversary of the euro. Get ready for a digital version of it coming to a home near you. So it seems there's no stopping central bank digital currencies. How dangerous
No.
are they for you, and how important of a step is it to get to the master plan you talked about?
Oh, it's absolutely central. It's a nightmare. And all G20 nations are well advanced in development of CBDC. And I think that is essentially operational. So it's been a global thing they've been developing for years now, and it's quite advanced. So it's a simple matter to what I show in the book is that the plumbing is in place. It's been in place for years now for all of the in a cascading financial crisis. There will be calls for more and more collateral as the value of the collateral falls. And this sleight of hand, what's happening is something that was always property has been turned into a contractual claim, uh, and which will have no standing in the insolvency. And then, but all of that property has been transferred to underpin the derivatives complex at the central clearing counterparties, where all of the derivatives are now centrally cleared. So the risk of the entire derivatives complex is now concentrated on the balance sheets of these things. And we know from this Fed document, the Fed response to the legal certainty group, that secured creditors of a clearing entity always have super priority claim to the collateral. So that's the end game. So what they've done is to now notice derivatives are contracts, always have been contracts that would never have had a standing in the bankruptcy. So this is the sleight of hand, is to take something that had been property that it would have been criminal to take that property. It would have normally just been returned to the owners, as it should be, and that is being transferred to entities that are behind contracts that never would have had a standing in the insolvency. Um, so that plumbing is in place for that to be, they have an automated global view for that to happen, particularly in a crisis. So this is planned. Then the closure of the banks, we just know from the 30s, it can be done overnight. And I tell the story of my aunt. I asked her what happened in the Depression. She said, well, suddenly no one had any money. And I could not understand that. I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, suddenly no one had any money, and even wealthy families didn't have any money. They couldn't send their daughters back to private school. This is from her experience. And now what that means is, even though the banks reopened, the Fed reopened, even wealthy families still did not have any money. Now, why? Because they they may have had money in something other than the Federal Reserve Bank, and they lost all of that money. And then, but their debts are not canceled. Their debts are then consolidated into the Federal Reserve System and enforced. And that's what was done.
And and I want to get to this point, David, and because in the book you say how your dad, how you have to prepare for these situations, because we always think like, what do you mean it's impossible? Like all of a sudden I wake up and I have nothing. Like how could my life change so drastically? But it can happen. And you say your dad had enough food to last a year,
Well, yeah,
and you couldn't understand it at the time, but obviously today you do get it. You have a farm. Um, Not everyone can have a farm, but
well,
is that,
having a pantry
but I,
is something
yeah,
anybody.
have a pantry.
Yeah.
Right. So I just want to get back to things we can do to prepare. So you say it's important to have like food supply,
We're in a
diversification.
you should be prepared to get through disruptions, because they're going to bring about some disruptions. and we don't know what it will be. But again, when you say, well, when would this happen? And I point to this in the book. We have a view into it from planning documents in Europe. There's something called the Bank Resolution Authority in Europe, which essentially all the countries were forced into after the last financial crisis. Um, and in their planning documents for 2022, they mandated that by the end of 2022, the biggest banks and only the biggest banks would be ready operationally to go flat on their derivatives books instantly. And so that was operational at the end of 2022. By the end of 2023, they said that they would have fully completed their work, and they were on track to complete that. So what we're talking about is preparations for the biggest banks to basically front run and get and is and even in their document they basically say, of course all banks can't be saved, and it won't even it will also be that only certain subsidiaries of the biggest banks will are designed to continue. Others will be pancaked. So, for example, in the last financial crisis, the Fed authorized lots of banks to move derivatives books into their deposit taking entities. Now
Is that part of
that doesn't help the depositors to do that. Why would they do that? It assures that those deposit taking entities will fail. So that's something you do if you intend to comprehensively wipe out the depositors. That's what you have to do as a precondition for the CBDC, where people will have no alternative but to fire up their phone and download their app to start getting
yeah.
CBDC so they can live.
But are you optimistic that, with works like your book and people waking up to the dangers of central bank digital currencies, that is it still possible to stop it
It is
if there's a global awakening of people saying, no, we don't want it?
It is absolutely possible to stop it. That's why this is, this, this must be seen as a really bad idea and mocked as that. This is the end of the road for a totalitarian ideology, which, people don't realize that has always been also been joined at the hip with the central banks. They've been behind all this stuff in every incarnation because they want central control, they want warfare, they want instability. They are not capitalists.
Talk to me about life post the success of this book. I mean, do you feel safe?
Um, I I would have to say that my freedom is that I am not afraid to die. I'm really not. That you have to transcend that, and then you're free.
Do you feel safer in Sweden than in the United States?
Well, I'll tell you what's happening in real time here. Over the last 2 weeks, the in the Riksdag, the parliament, the all the parliamentarians were called together in front of the military and told to prepare for war and who they would be taking orders from. And then they proceeded with different people in the government essentially threatening the population that they were behind the curve in preparing for war. Now, think about this. What sense does that make that anyone would attack Sweden? It's this is on one level, it's nonsense, and it is, but there's a reason they're doing it. So people are being threatened in this way. In Ecuador just now, they, 30 car bombs were set off, and masked gunmen went into a TV station. And so they've now declared a state of war in Ecuador. It's easily done. And this kind of thing is, I can say why that is happening. If you go back into, there's a continuity through from the 19th century in socialism, communism, National Socialism. Friedrich Hayek warned about this in 1944. So before the war was even over, that Britain was going in the same direction. Essentially the same people were controlling. These are the Fabians. The London School of Economics is Fabian. They so they are central planners, and it as Hayek says, the real world is so complex it cannot be centrally planned. What you need are constantly reorganizing autonomous entities. They used to be called people. That can, and that is how you meet human needs. But that is not their objective. Once it goes to central planning, it might look good to begin with. It might look benevolent, but then it tips into malevolence. And totalitarianism always ends horrifically. The problem is they have been able to run with unlimited money for a century. So all of the psyops, all of the intelligence agencies, all of the propaganda, public facing, all of this is run by these entities that have been totally unchecked. And that's what we're in now. So by the middle of the 20th century, there were people like Bertrand Russell, who's considered to be a genius, who was talking about the implications of a scientific society. He had been a Fabian, and he is articulating, and this is a book I found through Ed Griffin's book as one of the reference texts, but Bertrand Russell is saying, look, if we're not going to have warfare, which is the organizing principle for society, of course, you and I might not agree with that, but the people that control the central banks agree with that. So if we're not going to have warfare, we have to have something else that's like warfare, that's equally threatening, and it will probably have to kill a lot of people. This is the smart guy saying this. The Club of Rome was like this also, that we will probably have to create pollution in order to create the justification for controlling the population. So these ideas are decades old. And now they've taken this. This is the dilemma we have now, is the global warming narrative really doesn't work. That's what they were going to, was this idea that, well, we have to save the planet based on this. But if you watch what's happening right now, they're going back to escalating warfare.
Well, this brings to mind another question, and not to go off tangent here, but when do you think the creation of the elite controlling the global system happened? Was it about the time the Fed was created? I
No,
mean, at what point in history
I think
did a few people decide we can control the world?
I think it really was beginning with the Bank of England. So it goes
Okay.
back 400 years, if not further than that. But there were times in the U.S. The American Revolution was really about getting out from under that, rejecting it, and then they followed us over and made repeated attempts to reestablish central banking. And the founding fathers were adamant. Ed Griffin does a great job of showing how determined they were. So everything that has been done has been unconstitutional.
Um, I want to thank you for this deep dive. I know we just threw a lot of information at folks, so I invite everyone to read The Great Taking. And you're going to think this is a crazy question, but it's my curious nature, and I have to ask this because you said you had a near death experience, which was obviously very personal, obviously, and you felt it was your purpose to write this book. When you had that experience, do you feel you left this world?
Uh, no, I would say that what happens is it is a breaking of the persona. And when that happens, you realize that I, I've come to realize the person, our persona is just a construct. It will not exist in fairly near future. It will not exist. So people think that the entire universe revolves around their persona, which is, when you think about it, that is insane. That is what's insane. And I have had experiences of getting being released by basically leaving my persona behind. It's a relief to just let it go. And you only get to that point through having gone through a lot of pain and suffering. And this is something that humanity has known. We've been in a long period of sunshine and cotton candy, and most of human history was not like that. People knew suffering.
What comes next for you? I mean, you've obviously fulfilled your purpose. You've written the book. It's gone viral. It's extremely successful. The documentary. What's next for David?
Uh, I well, I'd have to say I think there have to be. I say this has to be unwound legally and peacefully. So it's figuring out how to do that. There have to be people that become engaged to base. They're called lawyers. There have to be lawyers. I said to someone recently who was a lawyer, Shakespeare said, "First, let's kill all the lawyers, but now we need you." So we need lawyers involved. I think it is important for people to think about how wonderful the world can be. Things can get better right away by just stopping. My two things are: give people back their stuff. How's that as an economic policy? Give people back their stuff. There's no reason you can't know who owns what. And secondly, stop hurting people. Um, it's very simple, but we will never get out from under this if the control by the central banks continues. I'm absolutely certain of that. Um, so we just have to have enough people aware of that. In the United States, it would be done with an act of Congress. And Ed Griffin writes about a way of doing this. Other people, we need to begin thinking about this. Really we need to manifest this reality of how things are going.
Mm. David Rogers Webb, I appreciate you taking this time to speak with me. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, and I
This is,
hope it reaches a lot of folks out there.
yeah, Daniela, this has been a great interview and talk. I really appreciate it so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate your time. I appreciate the work you do in helping to educate people. Just get people thinking outside of the traditional system, and look out beyond what's being told on mainstream media. So I applaud you for that. Thank you. And thank you all for watching. I hope you loved the interview. If you have questions, I'm sure you do, or if you want to discuss the topic more, or figure out a strategy of how to prepare, you can reach out to one of my great colleagues over at ITM Trading by booking a Calendly appointment. You can do so in the description below. Thank you all for watching, and of course, we'll always have more great content coming your way. You can sign up at danielacambone.com to stay on top of it all. That's it for me, and we'll see you real soon.